Hey guys, Ron here, and over the past few months I've released videos detailing the best parts of each generation, like the plot of Gen 5, and the worst parts of each generation, like the bad level curve of Generation 2. But now I'm going to talk about the multiple controversial elements of each generation. What are the aspects that fans are split on? After all, controversy isn't about negativity, but rather disagreement. I'm going to talk about features that people hate and love. For example, some people hate the water in Hoenn, while others love it. Some people hate the jump to 3D in Gen 6, and some find it to be well handled. But elements like Kalos' difficulty aren't going to be part of this because people kind of agree that X and Y are relatively easy. Keep in mind, I'm not going to talk about controversial takes that span multiple generations or the entire franchise, only elements that are attributed to a specific generation. There will be some overlap with my other two videos, but the whole point will be to show the many perspectives that Pokemon fans have on various parts of each generation. Let's start with Gen 1. The first controversial parts of the game set in Kanto is the simplicity. Many people find them to be a perfect gateway into the franchise with a non-intrusive plot, freedom to explore, and the archetype for every region that came after it. But those who may not have any nostalgic feelings towards Kanto believe the region to be relatively bare bones with a boring plot and a bland landscape, not to mention a slew of technical problems in the first gen. Speaking of which, the second controversial part of Generation 1 games are their glitches. Newer fans may see them as unpolished, unprofessional relics of the past, while other fans actually love to exploit these glitches that open up many new possibilities. It's part of what makes Gen 1 iconic, mysterious, and a part of modern conversation. Some Pokemon are even obtained through glitches like Mew, so glitches are part of the playstyle, therefore glitches had to be embraced. The third controversial aspect are the Pokemon themselves. The Gen 1 Pokemon weren't really controversial in the first few generations, but now that people inevitably complain about the designs of any newer gen while praising the first generation and its design philosophies, there's a counter movement of fans that will be hypercritical of Gen 1's Pokemon in order to show that Pokemon has always had a few bad designs, leading me to the last element, the generation in general. Other than the newest generation, this is the only generation that receives legitimate arguments over whether or not it's a quality generation. Since we have Gen 1ers who think Generation 1 is one of the only valuable generations, we have the opposite end of the extreme with Gen Whiners, fans who will jump at the opportunity to express dissatisfaction with Generation 1 and highlight its flaws. The average fan, though, has a perspective that is basically a mixture of both sides. Just like any generation, it is flawed but still enjoyable. Now we're moving on to Generation 2 and Johto's controversial aspects. The first one is Johto's lack of plot. It's not necessarily egregious, but it's kind of the region with the least amount of plot. You have those who don't really care about plot in their Pokemon games and really enjoy Johto's non-linearity and freedom that arises from a small plot. But the opposite group of fans find Johto to be relatively boring and over-reliant on Kanto. To be fair, it was made to coincide with Kanto, but doesn't justify every single kind of Pokemon fan's playstyle. But what Pokemon game does? The second point of contention is the non-linearity of Johto. Again, tons of people like that and all the positive traits that come along with it, but a lot of fans also don't like the negative aspects that are a result of Johto's layout, such as the horrible level curve, bland trainer battles, and Pokemon availability. It all comes down to the last controversial element, the post-game and Johto's Kanto dependency. Many fans often cite the revisit of a previous region as the holy grail of features. Others say that there's nothing major to do in the Kanto post-game other than battling the gym leaders. Maybe it's a quality versus quantity kind of argument. It could be people in the modern age being sick of Kanto, or it could be a counter-movement of those who are finally noticing Gold and Silver's flaws after 20 years of worship. Hoenn time! Gen 3 is when generations began to be contentious. The first controversy is probably how Ruby and Sapphire are not backwards compatible with Gens 1 and 2. This was the first Nat Dex controversy, since for 2 years, you couldn't acquire every Pokemon or transfer the Pokemon you previously raised into Gen 3. Of course, those who don't transfer Pokemon from previous gens or understood the technical limitations that caused this problem weren't too happy that fans were dropping the franchise for reasons that seemed to them pretty petty. The pettiest controversy revolves around contests. While it's one of the only features here that doesn't affect the entire game, that's kind of the reason it made the list. It's one of the few side features that people often cite as the worst part of the generation. You can easily not play through any Pokemon contest, and to some, it's actually a really fun experience. So these spectaculars are extra controversial because fans either hate them or love them. But the third and most famous controversial opinion in Hoenn is the water. To many, the overabundance of water routes kinda ruins the game. They are relatively barren and contain the same few Pokemon, but other fans find it to be a staple of Hoenn for many reasons, like its importance to the plot, how the water in various islands make the adventure feel vast and wondrous, the inclusion of diving, and maybe even the music. It highlights the theme of the region, but it doesn't change the opinion of those who take 2.2 points off this region's score simply because it has too much water. It also exacerbates the next controversial inclusion, Team Aqua and Magma. They're the most controversial evil teams in Pokemon, because there are those that cite them as the big flaw of Hoenn games. They think both teams should have known that their plans would have destroyed the Earth, that Team Magma just likes land, and that Team Aqua just likes the ocean, which makes them hard to take seriously, while the other side claims that, especially in the remakes, it's clear how Team Magma wants to increase the landmass so that there is more room for humanity's advancement. They want to create the final or Omega stage for human development, while Team Aqua believes that humanity's progress is tainting the world and the lives of Pokemon, and they want to revert the Earth back to its primal or alpha state, where it's mostly water, the origin of all life, and the best environment for Pokemon to thrive in. Obviously, they're both crazy and taking their ideals to an extreme, but that's literally what all evil teams with a plan have done. The most interesting villains in all of fiction, like Thanos, are blinded by their ideals and don't see any other path than the extreme. Not to mention, all of this was literally social commentary on real-world events that were happening in Japan at the time. Check out Tama's review of Ruby and Sapphire for further explanation. The last controversial aspect is only related to the remakes. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire's lack of Battle Frontier. Many fans are disappointed by its exclusion, and especially the excuse by Game Freak that kids nowadays wouldn't even have the attention span to play them. The original Battle Frontier made Emerald a legendary game, and to some, the refusal to go the extra mile actually ruins the entire game, since Heart Gold and Soul Silver included a Battle Frontier when they didn't have to. A lot of fans who weren't too picky before started to become critical of Game Freak at this very moment. It contrasts with those who enjoyed the game nonetheless, and maybe are a bit disappointed by the lack of Battle Frontier, but didn't expect one or were super satisfied with the Delta episode and the other post-game features. Now it's Sinnoh's turn. The first major controversial part is the region itself. As you'd expect, to most fans, Sinnoh is vast, relatively diverse, has many secrets to uncover, dynamic routes, and atmosphere galore. But on the other hand, its over-reliance on HMs and atrocious route obstacles makes it really annoying to traverse through the landscape of Sinnoh. In the end, it's all about what you focus on and prioritize. The average person can immerse themselves in Sinnoh while still acknowledging that many of these obstacles could have been handled better. Next are the legendary Pokemon. Nowadays, people are nostalgic for the days when legendaries were this epic and story-driven events were packaged with distributions. But back in the day, some people didn't like the scale of these legendaries. Some thought it was too ambitious and kinda ridiculous to encounter and train literal Pokemon gods, creators of space, time, antimatter, emotion, will, knowledge, and the universe itself. There are also too many legendaries, and I don't see that as a problem, but people did, I swear. And a lot of people thought they were over-designed, but that's minor. The third controversial feature was the Distortion World. While many people see it as a puzzle-filled additional location with a fight and legendary encounter, others see it as a waste of time, a boring void, and an overrated feature. Just like most of these entries, the reality is probably a mix of both. Fourth is the inclusion of many Pokemon evolutions in babies. Babies are controversial in general, but relatively harmless, but the huge amount of new evolved forms to previous mons had a mixed reception. A lot of people thought they were cool, useful, nostalgic, and heavily anticipated, while others saw it as a crutch that brought us less completely new Sinnoh Pokemon, a mixed bag with a lot of weird designs that didn't improve on the originals, and sometimes an embarrassment. What do you think? And finally, a minor problem, but something often cited as the worst flaw in Sinnoh: the lack of fire types. In Diamond and Pearl, you could only get 2 fire type families in the main game, including the starters. This was kinda fixed in Platinum, but the amount of fire types was still laughable. The reason this is controversial isn't because some hated this and some liked it. It was more that some really noticed and others didn't at all. Because, you know, if you literally don't want a fire type, this wouldn't matter to you. Now we enter an example of a controversial generation in general. People's opinions of Generation 5 is the most fickle and unpredictable in the entire franchise. It used to be considered the worst, and now it's considered the best? I mean, as a Unova fan, there isn't a problem here, but Unova does showcase how this fandom isn't fully united. The first controversy are the Pokemon themselves. People hate them or love them. I think people who dislike Gen 5 Pokemon cite the ice cream, the garbage, all the object mons, ripoff or reboot mons, humanoid mons, ugly mons, and even the ones that are super intricate. It just seems like to them there is a reason to dislike every single Pokemon in this gen, while those who love it think that Unova has some of the best designed Pokemon in the franchise. So many Gen 5 Pokemon look dangerous or mysterious or, you know, cool. In reality, it's the generation with the most amount of mons, and because of that, there are more chances to hit, but also more chances to miss. They focused on quantity over quality, but because of the quantity, there are as much quality mons as other generations, just not percentage-wise. But this problem was worse because of the next aspect: the fact that Black and White only had Gen 5 Pokemon during the main game. I get it, to those who didn't get attached to Gen 5 mons and fell in love with their teams, This is a huge problem. The Pokemon themselves are the biggest reasons most people play Pokemon, so you basically don't have fun if your team isn't to your liking. But to the average fan who liked these Pokemon just as much as any other new roster, it was a cool opportunity to simulate the excitement and wonder that fans felt during Gen 1, where all the Pokemon in the region were new and mysterious. And those in the middle like Gen 5 Mons, but missed playing with old Pokemon as well. Next is Unova's linearity, both in progression and layout. It was the first region to prioritize the story, so the path you take is pretty fixed, basically taking you on a circle around the region. People felt less free and that the choices were less significant. You can't go out of your way to battle any new gym leaders out of order, or you can't discover a new path to get to where you want to go, so the journey feels more artificial. But the opposing opinion is that Unova offers many split and off-beaten paths to almost every route or landmark. This is how you progress through the region, but these are all the paths you can take and places you can explore. And that doesn't include all the intricate landmarks like caves and dungeons. It's not like you're on rails. The routes themselves are dynamic and even change and open up based on season and HMs that you have, which are less intrusive than the HMs in Sinnoh, especially now that TMs are infinite. So yes, freedom from place to place is linear, but the locations themselves are some of the most dynamic in the franchise. And to be fair, Black and White 2 fixed the linear progression. Lastly, animated sprites. It's no controversy that these were better than static sprites and that they were the natural next step, but to some they were too pixelated and looked terrible up close. To others, they were lively, full with even more personality, and honestly impressive. This has become less controversial though, since more and more people have come to like this style now that Gen 8's animations are being dragged by fans, but nostalgia for this style now exists. Especially after Gen 6's first controversy, the jump to 3D. People have waited for this since the end of Generation 4, and some people didn't even like how Gen 5 was too visually similar to Gen 4. But when we got 3D, the reception was mixed. People were definitely impressed that Game Freak and Creatures Inc. were able to model, texture, and animate 720 plus Pokemon, and almost everybody loved the dynamic camera angles and backgrounds, but a lot of fans also think that the textures are too washed out, some Pokemon didn't translate well into 3D, and the idle poses of our Pokemon are too static, while in the past, they always looked like they were ready to attack. Our second controversy was the amount of new Pokemon. Kalos introduced the smallest roster out of any new region. Some fans simply didn't enjoy that fact, while others claimed that this small roster is the reason Kalos has such a solid and undisputed batch of new Mons. It chose quality over quantity. But the other side's argument can be that other regions have way more Pokemon with the same amount of quality, and that Mega Evolution took away our opportunity for more new Pokemon, leading us to our most controversial aspect, Mega Evolution. When it was released, people simply weren't keen to change. Some compared an extra temporary evolution to Digimon, they thought a lot of new Megas were over-designed, that Game Freak jumped the shark and gave us an unbalanced feature that made the average battle in X and Y even easier, catered to Gen 1ers, and made popular Pokemon more overrated. But the other side basically thinks what most people think nowadays, that the new designs were amazing, a good way to make some Pokemon relevant, and that they made the meta a bit more fun. It introduced some good lore and helped expand the world of Pokemon. Our fourth point of contention is the Exp Share. The fact that X and Y is relatively easy isn't controversial. It's almost universally accepted. The question is whether or not the Exp Share is the reason for this. Now that the Exp Share is back to distributing experience between the entire party, some people say that turning this key item off offers a more difficult X and Y experience. Others say that trainer battles themselves are simply way easier, regardless of how experience is distributed. They're both right though, it's an easy game. For example, gym leaders have 3 Pokemon with 3 moves, and on the other hand, yeah, it makes sense that if your Pokemon aren't overleveled due to the Exp Share, that battles will be a bit tougher. And finally, we have the fact that there is no third Pokemon game in Kalos. I'm not going to get into the fact that there's no Pokemon Z because it's kind of accepted as a negative thing by most people, so it's not controversial. But Alola is. You know its most controversial element. Many people think that there is a lot of handholding in Alola games and a ton of cutscenes. They think it's excruciating, halts any freedom, and is super boring if you aren't invested in the characters and story. But that's the thing. Those who enjoy story and therefore cutscenes, and those who simply don't find handholding to be all too annoying, or do find it annoying but love everything else in the game, find these games to be the most rewarding and immersive. Next is difficulty. Some people find these games easy, especially with the Exp Share on, while others find the totems, kahunas, and various bosses, especially Ultra Necrozma, to be tough. There are some that acknowledge the challenge but say that totems are unfair. Others say that there are so many inventive ways to defeat a totem or Ultra Necrozma. I'm personally one of those that believes that Ultra Sun and Moon are the most consistently challenging Pokemon games. I lost at least once to half of the totems, and of course Ultra Necrozma. And even a Kahuna, considering their Pokemon had perfect IVs. But then again, everybody has a different team and levels, so this is going to be anecdotal. Speaking of which, trials seem to be very controversial. A lot of people like the change and commend Game Freak for finding something other than gym leaders for once. They of course find the totems to be a nice change of pace and like how they make sense within the culture of Alola, while others believe that they're basically the same as gyms, have repetitive wild battles in trial sites, and offer less trainer battles. They think trial puzzles are the most condescending and trivial part of the game, while those in the middle agree that trials have rudimentary puzzles, but that totems are way more challenging and dynamic than the average gym leader. Ultra Beasts are also fairly controversial. There are those who find them to be weirdly designed, very hard to get attached to, stray too much from traditional Pokemon, and were not a good alternative to the usual legendary Pokemon, while others like the fact that they're weird and original considering the point is that they're Pokemon from other dimensions, and to some they're simply cool and don't hurt. I mean, they're just pixels, I guess. They experimented with something and even if you dislike them, they had a concept and went with it. Z-moves are just another gimmick that people either hate or love. Some people think they are more naturally fitting within the franchise than Megas, that they have breathtaking animations, that it's much better how any Pokemon can use a Z-move, and that they expand the options of various strategies, while others think that they are simply a nuke button that makes competitive more shallow. Ultimately, people see it as another gimmick that would eventually be replaced. The final controversies in Gen 7 are the existence of Ultra Sun and Moon and Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Some people think that Ultra Sun and Moon are the definitive Gen 7 experience with much more to do than Sun and Moon, but with a less interesting plot. It's one of the hardest Pokemon games and added more content to its predecessor than Emerald and Platinum did. Others also see Let's Go as a delightful change of pace and an alternative way to introduce fans into the franchise. On the other hand, a lot of fans wanted Sun and Moon sequels instead, or at least one game instead of two. They believe the Ultra games barely fixed any flaws in Sun and Moon, and that they came out too soon. Some even think that they're worse than Sun and Moon simply because of the botched plot. And then there are those who think Let's Go are the worst Pokemon games in the series. Too different, extremely easy, and completely unnecessary considering they are our 5th visit to Kanto without any real changes. And finally, Gen 8, the most controversial generation of them all. The first entry is, you guessed it, the National Dex controversy. One side believes the Dex cut ruins the spirit of Pokemon, that Game Freak's excuse for it was either a lie or lazy considering the animations and graphics of Sword and Shield were disappointing, hate that they can't bring some Pokemon they love into the newest generation, especially considering Game Freak basically promoted this aspect in Gen 7, and some even boycotted the game, and those whose Pokemon experience revolved around collecting the Pokemon themselves felt betrayed. Some even believe it was just the tip of the iceberg in a game that was already filled with many problems, and the most extreme of these opinions is that those who are complacent in the face of this problem are the reason Pokemon games are going downhill. The other side of the spectrum seems to be the fans whose experience of the game is literally unaffected by the lack of National Dex, because they never transfer Pokemon from previous games and usually use Pokemon available within the game on their new team. A lot of fans felt it was inevitable that almost 900 Pokemon weren't practically sustainable in every Pokemon game, and they simply enjoy all the other aspects of Sword and Shield, believing that this wasn't a deal breaker. Ultimately, Pokemon has a relatively casual audience, so the average fan didn't even care and judged the game based on all the other aspects, and the DLC kinda remedied this controversy a bit, considering Pokemon are coming back in stages, just like people hoped they would, although the damage was already done. Animation is next. Considering Game Freak cited better animation as a reason for the Dex cut, people scrutinize the already worn out animations in Sword and Shield. There are those who feel they are an embarrassment, and those who acknowledge the disappointment, but also the many cool new move animations and how expressive Pokemon are in camp and the new characters. Dynamax is next. Some people see it as the least creative gimmick and in practice less strategic. Others think it's an epic spectacle and a good balance between Z-moves and Mega Evolutions, and not even close to lazy in terms of design since to some, Gigantamax Pokemon look more interesting than Megas, and a lot of fans put the new moves to great use. The wild area is controversial too. Some people think it's barren and lifeless, filled with terrible graphics and boring landscapes, while others find it to be a big step in the right direction, a highlight of the region, and greatly expanded upon in the DLC, indicating Game Freak's progression and future intentions to improve this feature. The Exp Share is still controversial. People dislike it for the same reason as before, on top of the fact that it's permanent now, while others still like it on top of the fact that it's finally well balanced and complements the game's level curve and wireless PC. The final starters are controversial too, although they have been for the last 4 gens, but this time even more so considering the Prevos are fan favorites and people dislike the trend of having humanoid starters. Considering all 3 final Evos are bipedal, people are kinda pissed. But most have a personal favorite just like always, and either think Inteleon has a very neat concept, Cinderace has a great personality, and that Rillaboom is as solid as most starters and exactly what we expected, at least in terms of concept. Starters are incredibly subjective and expectations are almost never met considering how much hype there is for their reveal. Hop is a character that some think is a copy of How, annoyingly upbeat and one note. Others love his character arc, development, competitive friendship, and understand that his motivations and personality are different than Hao's. And finally, the DLCs. There are those who believe DLCs in general are a scummy practice, especially if the base game is heavily flawed, that the content is too expensive on an already expensive game, that they don't add in as many Pokemon as they should, that all the new features should have been in the main game in the first place, that Game Freak should have been upfront with their intentions from the beginning, and that the Isle of Armor had a short plot. On the other hand, a lot of fans think DLCs are a step in the right direction, better than having to replay the same game in a more expensive third version, only to encounter a disappointing amount of new content, that the exploration and open, seamless, and prettier overworld of the Isle of Armor and Crown Tundra are exactly what we were missing in Sword and Shield, that incrementally adding back old Pokemon is a great way to make the meta more fresh, that it's nice that you don't have to pay for the DLCs in order to transfer the hundreds of new Pokemon added to the DLC, and simply that the new content is interesting and worth the price. In the end, when you have the biggest franchise, you'll end up with the broadest opinions within your fandom, but maybe understanding the various perspectives will unite us. Hopefully you enjoyed the video too, enough to leave a like and subscribe for more. Check the description for the t-shirts I made you guys, and my Patreon. Press the join button for rewards like seeing my videos early, a Pokemon icon near your name and comments, discount on merch, my Discord, etc. Make sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and I'll see you guys very soon.